The major issues that Insight Global is facing have to do with the quality of management. This is where they're underperforming. Through my firsthand experience and knowledge, there's a distinct lack of business experience, both academically and professionally, in their leadership positions, most notably in their back office. As Maya Kova has said, quality of management is the efficacy of management in the context of their followers and organization. So Insight Global has a lack of business experience both academically and professionally in leadership positions. And this is going to lead to poor decision making when they're managing as they're leaders in the organizations and different departments. And then they're going to underperform in the efficacy of management, efficacy of the organization, and the influence that they do have on the employees. So that carries a few different ramifications. So if Insight Global does not fix these issues, they're going to suffer from the effects of poor leadership. So this has a ripple effect that cascades throughout the employees, their work, and down to the stakeholders even. And this, in the shape of the employees, looks like low job satisfaction. They're going to look unmotivated, and consequently, this could turn into high turnover or low quality work that produces those lower style outcomes with the products and services being produced. This could, decrease market share. The customer base could go away. This means lower sales, and then different financial factors can go in. And when you have those lower revenues, that obviously is not a great thing. That lowers value and decreases stakeholder orientation. So if Insight Global keeps perpetuating this situation of low quality management, the organization is going to have an unmotivated workforce that continually reinforces bad outcomes at every level. And so then we move on to the structure, design, and culture. Starting off with the design, we're looking at how aspects of culture and structure are selected and managed to reach organizational goals. So Insight Global's structure is not selected nor managed well. They selected their culture well, but don't manage it well. Through the centralization of decision-making power, inexperience is demonstrated through departmental decisions and interactions with employees. There's a disparity between the values and beliefs that they espouse and their enacted behaviors. This disparity makes employees feel uninvested in and leaves an air of distrust between the employees and their leadership. And so then moving on to structure, more specifically, Insight Global structure creates an ineffective organization through promoting based off tenure and not merit. Those in leadership are being given duties that outweigh their merit, like decision making for the entire department. That decision making comes back as something that's very centralized, and that's going to be negative and magnified. But this could be mitigated through decentralization. Lack of experience in business and leadership positions negatively affects decision making and the employees affected by those decisions. This is going to lead to low formalization throughout the company. This is going to materialize as ever shifting standards for when to and not to make exceptions for certain procedures. There's no clear balance of when it's appropriate to do certain things to accommodate situations. For example, cutting checks for outstanding payments to contractors. There's also a high centralization of power within the department itself. Employees are kept in the dark of the happenings within the back office and are not consulted on pivotal issues. So they're generally left out of this, and this leads to more distrust and more feeling undervalued. As we read from the textbook, effective organizational structure improves the working efficiency of the organization, motivate employees rather than frustrate them, and facilitate working relationships among employees and across organizational units. So we see how important that really is. And then we go on to see the culture. Insight Global's culture is espoused in a very positive way, but it's enacted in a very different way. There's definitely a disparity there. The espoused culture includes a family-like culture, open lines of communication, and making your own path. But how that enacts in practicality includes a clique culture, unwillingness to hear and accept ideas from employees, and honestly a suppression of ambition. And so we look to business strategy as an internal factor. Insight Global is a staffing organization that would require fluid procedures and processes, as every staffing project is different. Additionally, they're working with thousands and thousands of individual contractors and permanent placements, which requires a level of customization. And the nature of the organization's talent is fairly low because they're taking advantage of a lot of fresh grads, just willing to take any job. And this requires a more bureaucratic structure that mostly obfuscates the processes and creates less talented supervision on the standardization of those processes. This also leads to a higher centralization of power as a tall top-down approach to even as administrative roles. And then for the external forces, we're looking at the external environment. People will always need jobs, so staffing is a stable environment, making ambition and suggestions for changes seen as disruptors. For organizations looking to perpetuate the status quo like this, ambitious employees can be seen as upsetting that balance, that stability. This also promotes high centralization. I think that these factors are going to actually be neutral, but the quality of management is grossly hindering the effectiveness of the organization in navigating those factors in the context of the design. And so next we're going to look and see how Insight Global embodies the principles and values of a conscious culture in management and its relevance to improving organizational function. According to Sisodia, the 4 tenets of conscious capitalism are going to be higher purpose, stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, and in this context, we're really looking at conscious culture. Just to kind of round this out, I believe that only one tenet of conscious capitalism is something that Insight Global is really taking on, and that's going to be that of a higher purpose. In staffing, you're providing a very important service to individuals, companies, and society. So the issue does not lie there. It is more with this stakeholder orientation, conscious culture, and conscious leadership. The lack of quality management is reflected by the disparity in espoused culture and enacted behaviors showing a non-conscious culture. Conscious culture must be tactile. And so that tactile is going to be trust, authenticity, caring, transparency, integrity, learning, and empowerment. The word tactile also suggests that the cultures of these companies are very tangible to their stakeholders as well as to outside observers. So not having a conscious culture permeates through the organization to all levels because these are enacted behaviors and values reflecting that culture. By not fostering a conscious culture, the organization is creating an ineffective organization that does not create value for its stakeholders. Through Sisodia's response in one of his writings, his research found that companies that adhere to these principles actually outperform the market by a 9-to-1 ratio over a 10-year period. That is a 1,111% versus 123% for the S&P 500, which is extremely impressive. So now we're going to move on and see how we can kind of effectuate change through the Kotter's 8-step change model. And so we look first to Kotter's distinctions of what leadership looks like, and this is going to be versus managing. And this is going to start out with creating an agenda. So we want to establish direction and then develop a human network for achieving the agenda by aligning people, and then executing those plans by motivating and inspiring. And then the outcomes, we're going to want to produce that change, and sometimes to a dramatic degree. Poor leadership does have a ripple effect that cascades through the employees, through their work, and down to the stakeholders. Insight Global needs to create an environment of higher quality management that promotes higher job satisfaction, that focuses on the needs of employees. And so we can look at this servant leadership focus, creating those open lines of communication and promoting those ambitions. This shift really creates a conscious culture and conscious leadership in conjunction with a higher purpose. The consequence of a more effective organization creates value to the organization's stakeholders. Though this change towards conscious capitalism will invite a higher quality of management that fulfills the employees more and removes the consequences currently seen. And so we want to create urgency as the first step in Kotter's 8-step plan. So there's going to be a need for change that we need to create a sense of urgency through not only the employees who experience it, but to those change agents. And then we need to form a powerful coalition. So the leaders of that change need to be convinced of the change. And then third, we're going to look at create a vision for the change through creating a guiding coalition. We can create a path forward by defining that vision. We need to communicate that vision, so we need to create a team, effectively empower members to share the vision and hear peers' voices. And we want to remove obstacles so the people who are feeling empowered to act on that vision in conjunction with standardizing those processes and removing stressors that could create those obstacles. And then we want to look at creating short-term wins. By creating those small steps, tangible successes, people are going to feel less dejected and more motivated to undertake the vision of the group. And then we want to build on that change. So the group has to continue to improve, and the process that builds on the progress being made toward the vision of change. And then we want to anchor in those changes in corporate culture by empowering those who advocate for rational approaches to the changes brought by the group. You create those new norms and processes for your organization, so those are really dug in deep. And then we look at those resistance to changes because those are always going to come up. And from the organizational standpoint, a threatened power and overdetermination are going to stem from the decentralization of power, and then overcoming those systems that are already in place with those predetermined dynamics. And then we want to address that by addressing these challenges for organizational resistances to change. We have to encourage participation by those affected by the change. Here we address the resistance in relation to control and power by giving those affected a say in helping design the change. Then we look to some of the more individual sources of resistance. Habit is going to be the situation where people are used to the repetition of the same job duties, and so those altering of the task creates resistance. And then people have the sense of security. And that's going to be the feeling of safety that's very important to people. Shaking up anything is always going to dissuade people from that sense of security that they like. So we want to address those individual sources by taking a holistic view and understanding the people, task structures, and information subsystems that are being affected. This helps individuals anticipate and process the effects of change on the organization more effectively. And then through this analysis, I've learned a lot about how pivotal a role the culture plays in the quality of management. Organizational culture is essential to organizational performance, and those values and behaviors ingrained in the culture are inevitably those that management is going to enact to new hires, and this perpetuates a continuous recycling of employees and leaders who enact those values and behaviors. So without a strong and genuinely enacted culture, especially amongst leadership, people can be left unmotivated, which leads to those poor business outcomes. Organizational structure can determine specific weaknesses in an organization. There are many factors that play into this, both externally and internally. By aligning your management and organizational goals with the structural factors selected, an organization can create a well-oiled machine that creates effective individuals, teams, and outcomes. And I think my biggest takeaway from this is actually how to address the resistance to change across a variety of sources. So I'm a very ambitious person, and I tend to vocalize my thoughts, including those about change, which sometimes can be a little scary as we've learned through all this. There's definitely a lot of resistances to change. And so Insight Global had many sources of resistance to change, but I could have addressed those much better. And one would be encouraging participation to overcome the overdetermination of the organization, because they really like to keep in those places their systems that like to predetermine the dynamics for the sake of stability throughout their organization for the reasons that we covered earlier. So through these processes, I think that we could create a higher quality of management and Insight Global that creates a more motivated workforce and leaves people feeling more satisfied about their job to create better outcomes and reinforce the conscious culture of Insight Global.